I want to tell you a story that I wish someone had have told me when I first became a yoga teacher, because from the outside looking in, it can look like success happens overnight. And you see all of these yoga teachers with these big communities and you wonder, how did it happen? And the truth is, it doesn't happen overnight. So I want to share my story over the last 7 years. All of the classes, the cancellations, the things that failed, the things that I did right, and the many, many, many times I had to bounce back. So let's get into it. So when I first graduated as a teacher, I got my first teaching opportunity in my friend's studio. And this was probably quite a lucky break. I will say this was probably the only lucky break I had, because I had that teaching opportunity right off the back of my graduation. So I started teaching on a Thursday night and it was amazing. It was just what I wanted to do, but I wanted more of it, and they didn't have any other teaching opportunities. You know, the schedule was full. So this is when I got speaking to my boss at the time and I said, hey, we have a gallery space. What do you think about me putting on a class here? And she was all up for it. She was really, really supportive. So I started putting on my first classes, the ones where I was the one in charge of the organization, in our gallery space. And this was a really good turning point for me, because it got me to understand the business side of teaching, right? Because all of a sudden I needed a website to send people to, I needed a booking system, I needed to take payments, and I needed to start promoting and marketing these classes. So I built a really useful skill set off the back of organizing those classes myself. Whereas I probably wouldn't have done that if I just stuck to teaching at my friend's studio, because I just didn't need to. All I needed to do there was turn up and teach. So this is when things started to pivot for me as a teacher, when I started to put on my own classes, because all of a sudden I needed to get people through the door, and that was a challenge in a small town like mine. And there were times, let me tell you, when there were only like my mom and my mom's friend present for those classes. And it used to feel so disheartening, because I'd done the marketing, you know, I tried to spread the word, but I just couldn't get people to that space. And I'd bought all these mats. I was so excited to fill the room, to have lots of energy. But, you know, week after week, there would just be times when nobody would turn up. And it probably took me about a year in that gallery space to get it so that there was consistently about like 10 to 15 people in the room. And even then it was very up and down, as classes go. But that felt like such a huge win for me. And this was about a year into teaching. You know, the gallery class was really established at this point. There was a community of people that were coming regularly and things were starting to go well. But this is when I also realized that that one class alone was not enough to sustain me. If I wanted to turn this into a full-time career, I needed more. So because I couldn't really put on any more classes at the gallery, I started to look for other teaching opportunities. So I started to reach out to other studios, and this is when I started teaching at a fancy studio. At the time it was part of a spa, and it was one of those studios where, you know, they're like right at the top. They're what you're aiming for. And I remember getting this opportunity and being so excited, because I was like, really? You're gonna let me teach here? I couldn't believe it. And I started teaching there on a Saturday morning. It was like really early on a Saturday morning at 8 o'clock. So it meant that I couldn't really have much of a life on a Friday night, because I always had to be up. You know, I was always there for about 7:30 in the morning on a Saturday so that I could set the mats up and everything like that. But I did it because I just really wanted that opportunity. And then because they were quite established, you know, they had a lot of clients that were coming, it meant that I could start running workshops there. So this is when things started to change for me again, and I started to take things a little bit further. And here's a photo from one of those workshops. And this is when it was quite exciting, because at the time I was watching what other yoga teachers were doing, and they were running these huge workshops. And I was like, that's what I want to do, but how can I do that in my small town? So this was my version of doing this. And this is when things started to pivot for me as well, because I realized that teaching these workshops, you know, I can offer a deeper, more comprehensive experience where I can make more of an impact. Whereas the classes, you know, I have to teach a lot of them, but I can't really go into detail. You know, it just feels very surface level, the information that I can share, whereas the workshops or the events, I can really give people a lot. So I wanted to start doing more of this. And I didn't just want to do workshops, I also wanted to create experiences for people. So around this time, I used to put on a yoga brunch. And I used to love cooking for people, so I would make everybody brunch and we would do an extended yoga session and then we would all have brunch together. And I did this for a little while, maybe about 6 months. Then, you know, I started to realize that these brunches were difficult. You know, cooking for people was difficult, trying to accommodate everybody's dietary requirements was difficult. I was probably putting in a lot more time, a lot more money than I probably should have. And I was looking at it like, how do I scale this? Like, where do I take this from here? Right? Maybe you've had that experience too, where you're just trying lots of things. And this is a common theme throughout my experience, that you try things, you realize that they don't work, and that's okay, right? You just have to go in a different direction. It doesn't mean that you can't not make things work. It just means that you have to experiment, right? And through my years and years of teaching, all of this has just been experimentation. So after I realized that the workshops were going well, but they were also quite difficult, you know, it was taking a lot of my energy, COVID hit. So all of that went away and I started to turn my attention to online. So this is when I was teaching like one-to-ones on Zoom, but again, Zoom was really difficult. There were times when only like 2 or 3 people would show up. I didn't really have the professional setup, you know, I didn't really have anything that set me apart from anybody else. But during COVID, because we had a lot of time to ourselves, this is when I started really focusing on Instagram and I started really focusing on teaching online. So this is when my Instagram kind of started to take off because I was creating tutorials, I was experimenting with different ways that I could teach through Instagram, like not quite in a class format, but through tutorials, you know, infographics and things like that. And this was probably one of the best things that I did, because this helped me build a community outside of my immediate like small town. Because I'd found so far up until this point that it was really, really difficult to get people through the door because there just weren't that many people in my area that were really interested in yoga. But I realized once I started going online that there's so many people in the world, you just have to build that community. You just have to be in a place where people can find you. And Instagram was that for me. So over COVID, I really started to prioritize my Instagram. And this is also when I created my first YouTube video, I think maybe around this time. And I went on a holiday. This was in between lockdowns. I went on a holiday with my mom and I took my camera and I found this spot. This was at like 5 a.m. in the morning. And I filmed outside and I was so proud of this because I came up through my like yoga journey, doing classes with like Boho Beautiful, watching like their level of videography and just being like in awe, like, wow, I really want to do what they're doing. So this is my attempt at doing what they did. And as I mentioned, you know, there's a common theme of trying things and them not working out. This video wasn't particularly successful, you know. The audio wasn't great, the camera quality wasn't great, like nothing about it was particularly great, but it got me started off doing what you see now on my main channel, where I go to locations and I film. And obviously now I've got the experience, but I wouldn't have got that experience if I hadn't have started during this like 5 a.m. session, you know, where I just didn't really have a clue. I just walked around and tried to find a spot that I thought would look good on camera, and I figured it out from there. So then, because we were in and out of lockdowns, I really started to focus online. I wanted to improve my camera quality. I wanted to improve everything. So I invested in some kit. I got a fancy light. I got a new camera. Not that I had any clue what I was doing with these things, but I realized that through learning these new skills, camera work, you know, how to utilize marketing on social media, this was helping me build my business skill set as a teacher. And just like when I started creating those classes in the gallery and I had to take on the organizing and the bookings, and that taught me a whole new skill set that my YTT hadn't, when I started going online, and especially on YouTube, this taught me a whole new skill set that I still use to this day. And in my opinion, this is the skill set that made the biggest difference for me, because without it, I couldn't do what I do today. I would still be stuck trying to get enough classes a week, knowing that, I would always be limited physically at what I could do, slowly burning out. That was my experience. So in between the lockdowns, I started to get much better with the camera stuff, lots and lots of trial and error. Then I started working with a few photographers because I thought, right, how better to learn than to shadow people, to like pick their brains and, ask them, what are you doing when you're setting this shot? What are you thinking when you're framing this photo? How are you working with the light? And I started picking things up from the people that I was working with. And this meant that I got more professional photos for my website so I could make things look a little bit more polished. But it also meant that through shadowing them, I could learn from them and then apply that to my YouTube classes, to my Instagram photos, so that I could start making things look more professional. Because at this point, I'd been doing this for like several years, and I was looking up to the other people, the other teachers who I respected, and they all had these super polished Instagram feeds. And it was during that time when Instagram was very much a highlight reel. There was not much like reality there, it wasn't very relatable. So that was what I was striving for. Not that I wanted to strive to be not relatable, but I just wanted to have those like picture perfect images, because I thought at the time that would help me be more established, that would help me seem more professional. So here's a few images of my Instagram over the years as it's gone through its many phases. And like I say, it's been a lot of trial and error. And this is when I realized that actually, the picture perfect stuff wasn't what connected with people. What connected with people was when I shared things that were of value, when I taught people something that they weren't learning anywhere else, or where I just shared a tip that made a big impact on their practice. So through this process, my Instagram started evolving. And because I was finding it really difficult on YouTube, right? The first 4 years on YouTube, I was pretty much invisible. I decided to create a membership site. This is probably one of the things that I struggled with most. This membership site never made it to the light of day because I had it custom built. I paid these developers that I found on Upwork or Freelancer, one of those, I can't even remember what it was now. But I spent loads of money having this built, and because it was being custom built, it just never quite met my expectations. There was always this feature that I wasn't quite happy with, or, I was comparing it to other bigger platforms like Allo Moves and the Sweat app and things like that. And I just couldn't achieve that with my budget, with the developers that I was working with. So even though I'd started filming for this membership site and I was all geared up for it, I just wasn't happy with it. And I had lost love for this project. So I ended up just giving up on it. And I really, really struggled with this because I felt like such a failure. I'd put 6 months of my time into filming. I'd got other teachers involved and I was filming with them. I'd told people about it. They were asking me like, when is this coming out? And I just had to be like, I'm sorry, it's not happening. If that happens to you as well, it's totally okay. Throughout my entire yoga career, I've had to bounce back. And that is the biggest thing that I hope that you take away from this story, is that one of the best qualities, if you could call it a quality, to cultivate in your teaching career is bouncing back. Because there will be times when you only have 2 or 3 people come to your class, and you've got to bounce back from that. You've got to come back the next week with more energy, ready to teach. There will be times when you go down one route, like I did with events, and you realize that maybe that's not the solution. There will be times when you put all of your money, your effort, your everything into a project like I did with the membership site, and you just have to walk away from it and bounce back. And then finally, I got another lucky break. After 4 years on YouTube, things really started to take off. I took everything that I learned over the years on social media, where I understood that it wasn't the picture perfect stuff that people related to. It was sharing content of value, you know, getting back to their questions in video form, creating tutorials that people could learn from. This is how I built my YouTube channel, and it started to take off. All of the years of tinkering with cameras, of learning from the photographers that I work with, the videographers, of just trying to pick up any tips that I could through watching YouTube tutorials, that helped me finally build the YouTube channel. Since then, it's been I think we're about nearly 3 years that things, I would say, have been quite successful. And now, you know, you might look at what I'm doing and think, wow, she looks like she's got it sorted out. But hopefully now you see that it's been a constant process of experimentation, of learning, pivoting, bouncing back. Even now, I'm not done. I'm constantly experimenting, constantly testing, constantly trying to improve as a teacher, as a content creator, as a business person. I've been through so many seasons of self-doubt, starting over, even burning out. And through all of it, I finally figured out what works. And not just for me, but for the other yoga teachers that I now coach. So if you are at a point in your career where you're looking for clarity, you want a structure in place, you want to build something that is sustainable, then click the link below to jump on a discovery call with me. This is your first step to building something that lasts. I'll see you there.